our little dance routines when we could, and our comedy routines, and our singing routines, you know, and so we could make plans to expose them. Well, we did that in '84, but once the investigation started up, they kept it covered up for all these years. So that's why I'm going public, is because it's been covered up for too long, and the mass media out there that are watching are turning to media, and I happen to know they are, already have their own evidence, and they've waited all this time to gather their evidence up and put it out there for us, and they're not allowed to because they don't have permission. And that's a fascist news media when you can't go ahead and go public with something after 24 years. The first media person I met not too long after I moved there where that mass graveyard was in the fall of '71 was Dan Rather, and he actually came into the woods, and I believe it was '72 when he got there, and the reason he did is I had Marcia Mason to contact him, and she was abducted out of Atlanta, Georgia, and brought to the area. I believe she told me there was 8 men involved, and 8 is a typical number to be surrounded by these people, too, that kind of just roughed her up, give her a shot of heroin, and raped her, and then threw her on a mass graveyard. Eric actually was the one that threw her on that, and because they made him. And he told her to stay there until after school, and there'd be some help. And so she stayed naked in them woods until after school. And he actually came by the school and said, there's a naked blonde in the woods. And I knew to go down there and look for her after school, but I was kind of out in that way, not all the way down there where the grave was, but I had spring water there, see, and the animals were always there, and I did my bird watching there and stuff like that. So I was kind of down there looking for survivors anyway, so we could send them back where they come from. We had a major problem of people not ever getting the investigation going. Now, we sent people back home and told them what to say, that we needed help. We couldn't get mail out of here to certain zip codes or however they did it because our post office was taken over, which were a small post office and a small town, unpopulated county, you know, so it was pretty easy to do. To this day, our mail, in case people don't know why, but this is the reason why our mail is gathered up and shipped to Cape Girardeau County, if it still is, and as far as I know it is, and we don't sort it here ourselves as far as I know, and that's why, because they had taken over and we couldn't get mail out of here, see. But I met Dan Rather in the woods. He actually came in because I asked Marcia if she would contact him because we couldn't get mail out, and her being in a bigger city like Atlanta, maybe she could get mail to him. And I asked for him because I trusted him with his tough questions and his news press release and stuff like that with people, you know, that he's involved with, that I thought he really would come in here, and he did. Well, we were being watched by 2 thugs with a camera on them, and them 2 thugs were involved with Kenny Chittenden, the one that had just recently died because his goofball wife was ready for her insurance or whatever and unplugged his life support before the doctors changed his meds on him. But anyway, Kenny was involved with these 2 goonballs, and what they did is hang out in the woods and set traps. Well, I had to get rid of them traps whenever I could to keep people from stepping in them, and the animals, because of illegal trapping and stuff like that. I believe Mr. Epps was one of them people that was out there. I don't know. But I asked Dan if somebody was with him, and he says, no, he's waiting for his ride, and it's be here in a minute. So I only got to talk to him for just a few minutes, I'm sure less than 10 minutes. But I turned around and went behind me, and there was the 2 men there, the older one and the younger one. So I just punched them both out. You know, I could do that in them days. And one of them, the older one, had a camera hanging around his neck, and it was just real heavy, and I guess he was doing his own footage. The point is, he couldn't show his footage to the local Nazi of the Dan Rather showing up on it, or they would have to kill Dan, right? They would know media was here. If the camera was gone, them 2 was going to have to keep their mouth shut, because if they let him get out of here, then they risked getting killed. So they couldn't talk to people about what happened. You know, I couldn't either. It was just one of them secret things that foreign intelligence knew about. But the deal is, I got the camera, and it was hanging around the guy's neck. He came to. I punched him out again. and I run and give that to Dan, and told him I would have to watch the road because if any cars come by, I'd have to stop them and, you know, do a little preaching routine to these people, which is something I did. And so he was going on down the road, and I believe I told him the first trailer down there is Anna Mann, and she's one of my friends, and she helps to get people back home. She's what we call the first driver, and then there was a second driver after she took people down the road, but we won't go into detail on it, you know. So Anna, I'm sure, is no longer alive. She was in her 60s back then, you know, in 71 when I first met her. And so he headed down the road, and a car come by with these two young men in it, so I had to slow them down just in case they were Nazis, so they couldn't turn around and go follow Dan. You know, I needed him to get away with his driver. And so I just did a little bit of preaching, told them they need to repent and stuff like that, and watch one of them cry, you know, and give them a good little religious routine and give Dan time to get away, you know. But he was my first media that I actually met there and spoke to, and I didn't talk to others, but foreign intelligence, and we can just call him Bob Jones because he's the one I was hanging out with, told me that there was other media in there. So apparently he was making sure there was evidence. We wanted to make sure there was plenty of evidence. That's why the militia started to begin with in 69, is because these people were so high and mighty, they pranced around talking about how respectable they were, how there was no evidence, how no one would ever believe what we say, there's no such thing as Satanism, and, you know, we were pumped full of this all the time, that here we were, poor kids, beat up, hair chopped off and handfuls of it poured out and stuff like that, and we were saying things about respectable citizens, a sheriff and a doctor and a dentist and lawyers, the district attorney, stuff like that. We were pointing the finger at people that had this college educations and had titles, right? And who were we? We were little peons, and this is what they wanted to instill in us, to make us think that no one would ever believe this, and we were supposed to grow up believing that, and I never did. And they were supposed to make us think that we would never expose them, and this would never get over with in this nation, and we didn't believe that either. We continued to gather evidence and secret photos and whatever we could, and beginning in 71, then the General X, the secret general of the militia unit, because we were about intelligence more than anything, and a little bit of guerrilla warfare when we beat the brains out. But they met in 71, and so actually the first time I met Bob Jones, and he had his little bit of info that was a package that actually came from Eric Clapton, but Eric had someone else to ship that out. You know, he couldn't do that himself. But whoever shipped it out, when they got the info and got in here, I said, do you know about the secret general? And he says, no. And I said, let me tell you his name and where he's at, and he's got some evidence waiting for you. So that was good that a ton of evidence was waiting for him, and it was good that it could leave the country before the Nazis tear somebody's house apart and find it. I don't even know to this day how he kept stuff hid so good, you know, list of names and stuff. But the first thing we did was gather up a list of names of people being brought in the county, you know, because we had to start somewhere, and that was something important.
You mentioned a few minutes ago 8 is a typical number. Why is 8 a typical number?
You know, I wish I knew, but I was many times surrounded by, I noticed 8 people or 8 cars that were staring at me, and I knew they would by their stares. Now, they wore disguises, and they wore different kinds of cars and stuff, but 8 is the number of new order, of regeneration, or resurrection. That's the symbolic number for the number 8.
It's strange you should say that, because I think for my rape I sent an affidavit over to a detective at the Chicago Police Department, and I think I wrote down that there were a minimum of 8. I have to look up that affidavit, but I do recall 8 at the gang rape, a minimum of 8. So I find that very interesting. It does have some symbolism to them then.
Right, it's important to them, yes. And in the future, when we get around to it, we'll talk a little bit about spiritual meanings and symbolic meanings that I grew up in. It was like an important part of my life, you know. I always said there's two books in our Bible, the physical, literal meaning, and then the spiritual, symbolic meaning. And I always studied it and grew up on it. So, yeah, 8 would be for